and I'm just incredibly excited to have Yvette Herrell on the show. Let me tell you a little bit about her if you don't know her. She served as a member of Congress from New Mexico's 2nd District from 21 to 23, but she is running again for that seat. She'll be crucial to try and keeping this slim majority that we have in the House, and she knows a lot about the border, of course, being from New Mexico. So happy Sunday, Yvette Herrell. Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are around the United States, and welcome to the Morgan Ortega Show.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely thrilled to have you. I mean, listen, you are just people with your experience on the border in these issues. We desperately need in Congress to hold this administration accountable. Now, our audience may not know this, but actually, back last fall in November, you and I went to the border together with some other candidates to Yuma, Arizona, and we were there. It was pretty amazing, actually. It was one of the best trips I've ever done. We were able to go in Yuma to the end of the border wall, where on day one of the Biden administration, they stopped building the Trump wall. And in fact, we even looked over probably a few hundred yards, Yvette, and we saw the border pieces that were just laying there to rot, and they had a fence around them, which was quite quite odd and ironic all in one. But unlike the photo opportunity that President Biden did last week at the border, we were there. You and I were there in Yuma, trying to educate ourselves, to meet with local farmers, people who work in food banks and at hospitals, to understand what really goes on in these border towns. So listen, tell us a little bit more about what's happening in New Mexico, what's happening in your state, the border, and of course, Yvette, why you're running again.
Great, and I will. And we did have a great trip. And, you're right, New Mexico is a border state. We have 180 miles of border in the 2nd Congressional District. And I've made multiple trips down. In fact, took a couple of Codels down. But we're seeing the same thing everybody else is around the country. Uptick in crime. Now our Border Patrol are putting themselves in harm's way to protect our freedoms. We have an administration who has turned a blind eye to this since day one in office. And sadly, Biden knows he can fix this. We could complete the wall. We could put more boots on the ground. We can give the tools necessary to the Border Patrol agents, but he won't do it now because we're 8 months away from an election year, and he knows if he does it now through executive order that every American will know that he squarely had control over doing this. And most of this could have been averted because of his executive orders. But just the cost to the American people, Morgan, people don't really understand when you're talking about housing, transporting, feeding, educating. And I think every single American now has understood how this is impacting our day-to-day lives and the cost to the American people. It makes no sense. And now it's time to change the way things are happening in Washington. And that's why one of the reasons I'm running, to help bolster that majority, like you mentioned, but also to ensure that we keep the American people safe and prioritize Americans first and foremost.
Yvette, let's make sure that we get this, because there's so many people that listen to the Morgan Ortega Show on Sirius XM Patriot Channel 125 around the country, but in New Mexico as well. What is your website? Let's make sure we get that in so people know how to follow you and get a hold of you, donate to you, whatever it may be.
You bet. It's just YvetteHerrell.com. That's YVETTE, Herrell, HERRELL.com. And of course, they can follow me on Facebook, same thing, Yvette for Congress. But go to our website and kind of see our positions on different things, because I believe, Morgan, right now, we really misprioritized what's important to the American people, which is our sovereignty, which is our safety, which is our Constitution, our border crisis, our economy, all of these things. And that's going to make the difference in November. And I really believe the most important person on the ballot this year will be the American people, because what we do in November is going to set the stage for the next number of years, which is going to be important for future generations. We've got to protect our nation.
I could not agree more. What's coming up on the campaign trail? I'm sure the border is a top issue in New Mexico, but I'm curious, are any other national security issues coming up? Israel, Ukraine, Taiwan, the military? What are you hearing?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, largely the people in New Mexico's 2nd Congressional support Israel. And in fact, it's a real disappointment that our delegation voted not to provide the aid for Israel. In fact, what's really terrifying and sad to me is we live in a border state, and none of our delegation will vote to secure the border. You know, they'll use it as a fundraising tool, but they even voted against the Lake and Riley Act last week. I mean, the priorities again are wrong. But our district largely are people who believe in this nation, believe in a better way of life, you know, are pro-life, are pro-Second Amendment, want to see a thriving economy, and support Israel. They stand with Israel, and that's going to be something we'll talk about on the campaign trail. And, of course, you know, I announced last April, so we've been all over the district, and it's always good, I think, Morgan, to just make sure you're building more relationships, because to me, serving means relationship. And when you talk to the people and can sit down and understand what's happening in their day-to-day lives, it's meaningful. And so we spend a lot of time traveling all over the district doing things like that.
That's awesome. I love that. You know, speaking about foreign policy, national security, which is what we talk about on this show, got to get your take on the war in Israel, what's going on with Hamas. Why do you think it is, Yvette Herrell? Why is it that we don't hear on the nightly news every night anybody talking about the fact that 6 Americans are still being held hostage almost 5 months later by a terrorist group in Gaza? Why do you think Biden gets a pass on that?
I think because Biden doesn't want to support Israel the way that we need him to, the way that Trump did, and the way that other presidents have. I think he's trying to placate to both sides of the aisle. And really what's disappointing, Morgan, is to see so many young people, especially, standing in support of Hamas and Palestine. And I think that just stems back to the indoctrination in schools, where we're not really understanding our world history and our allies and how important it is. And I just believe if they don't want the American public to know, then the media won't talk about it. And they take their cues from the White House, just like the border. Why did it take 3.5 years for some of the mainstream media to start actually admitting that, yeah, we have a crisis at the border? You know, we've got 8 million people in this nation who came across the borders illegally. But same with the war in Ukraine, same with Israel. If they don't want to talk about it, if they don't really support it, it's not America First agenda coming out of this White House. And I think that's the takeaway that people need to realize.
I think that's a great point. We saw that from President Biden's State of the Union Thursday night. It wasn't about America first. He started talking about putting other countries first, and it was very much scare tactics. And for me, that's when you know your policies aren't working. When your whole campaign, and by the way, you've sat in the State of the Union as a member of Congress. It's just so inappropriate to make that a campaign speech and not the State of the Union. I said this at the beginning of the show, Yvette. I love how the party of rules and norms likes to break rules and norms in order to try and defeat former President Trump. Whatever. But when you look at what's going on around the world, and you see catastrophe after catastrophe, war after war, you got to think, the policies just aren't working. And that's why President Biden and his team have resorted to just scaring the American people. And in essence, their argument was, if you don't vote for us, then you're not for democracy, which I thought that was the whole point of an election, Yvette, was democracy.
Exactly. And you're absolutely right. You know, it's kind of it was finger pointing all night long, instead of actually taking responsibility for the failed policies, the economy, the border, and a host of other things. And I believe, and I really have more faith in the American voter. I think we're smarter than this. I don't think they need Biden or anybody else to say the economy's not great. We've got a crisis at the border. Your kids are not now safe like they were just 3-5 years ago because the uptick in crime all over the country. And I believe voters know these things regardless of party affiliation. I think it's all about people over politics right now. And this is going to be the year that we can speak and use our voices at the ballot box.
Absolutely. I could not agree more. And I'm just so grateful that you are running again. You understand, your constituents understand what's going on at the border. And I love it when we have strong women with your background running as well. You know, I hope that we can make it to New Mexico. Maybe I'll get out there on the campaign trail with you. Yvette, if you can, just remind our listeners one more time about how they find you, how they donate to you. Make sure that we all know about your campaign.
You bet. So it's YvetteHerrell.com, YvetteHerrell.com. And we would very much appreciate your prayers, and your financial support. And there's a donate button on the website. So we want to flip this seat. We want to get back to Washington and fight for the American people, and we need your help to do it. And so I'm just grateful for this opportunity, and just keep praying for our nation and for these candidates. And, if they can support me financially, I'd sure love your listeners to help us out. We'd love it.
Well, thank you so much, Representative Yvette Herrell, running again to try and flip that seat back in New Mexico. Just want to thank you for being on the show.